Referendum in Sudan, next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus. I'm Rob Resigliano, Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM. The recent referendum in Sudan was a key component of the comprehensive peace agreement that ended the nation's 22-year civil war. The conflict between North and South was driven by many factors, including geography, ethnicity, and religion. Control of Sudan's considerable oil revenues has been a further complicating factor. Development remains a daunting challenge for the people of southern Sudan and the international community. The area, which is roughly the size of Texas and California combined, has only 5 miles of paved roads. Here, with a first-hand report on conditions on the ground in southern Sudan, we're pleased to be joined by Art Wichers, Vice Chairman of the nationally acclaimed real estate and asset management firm Zilber Limited. He is also the retired president and CEO of the Town Group of Companies. In addition to his role as a corporate leader, he serves on a number of community boards and is one of 6 lay members of the National Catholic Relief Services Foundation Board. He has traveled extensively with Catholic Relief Services, joining missions to South Asia, East Africa, and South America. His most recent trip was to southern Sudan and Ethiopia this past fall. Art, welcome to International Focus.
Thank you. Good to be here today.
Art, now you've been to the region, and I'm wondering if you could help people who are less familiar with the region understand a bit of the context of the whole referendum and the longer-term violence between North and South Sudan, where that all comes from and where it's going.
Well, there was a 22-year civil war, and so you have to realize most of the people on the ground today, their biggest experience was in the military or escaping from the war. And when they signed the peace, comprehensive peace agreement, people were really concerned what was the next step. And the next step was, should there be unity or secession, which is this referendum that's going on right now. And this is what was probably the most important issue in everybody's mind when I was there. And what surprised me the most was everyone talked about it almost in whispers. And it was going to be, we are going to have our own free democracy.
We meaning those of us in the South.
Yes. I was so... That was a change from when I'd been there 6 years earlier, where there was a lot of people who, yes, they thought they could convince the North they could work together.
There was an attempt after the 2005 agreement to have a kind of a power-sharing government, or to bring southern Sudanese leaders into the government in Khartoum, and I suppose as a way of convincing the South they could exist here as part of have their identity but be part of Sudan. But that hasn't really panned out.
No. The people on the ground have felt it was done with words but not with deeds. They felt like they were marginalized.
And that's what people in the run-up to the referendum were saying. This is going to be the most explosive place on earth. It's going to be the next big, or the violence is going to resume. They're going to fight the Civil War all over again rather than let the South leave, which everyone assumes that's how people would vote in the South. But that violence largely hasn't happened up until this point. What's happened?
Well, I think the international attention by the United Nations, by the U.S., has all led people to sit back and say, there's such a desire for the secession. Let's go through this first phase, but the key elements will come in the next 6 months when they work out all the specifics, like you mentioned, oil or water, big issues.
Say more about that. Let's talk about oil second, but let's talk about water first, because it's certainly something here people in this part of the world can understand as the importance of water, living near one of the Great Lakes. What is the issue of water in between North and South Sudan?
The biggest issue is the Nile River. And the Nile River runs as differently than we think. It comes from the south and runs to the north. So all at once, if you don't have appropriate agreements between the north and the south, and you also need them with Egypt, and you want to put in hydroelectric dams, you want to use water for irrigation, all that has to be planned out, or a lot of people are impacted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure people here can understand about sharing water and why it's difficult, even in this part of the world.
Yes.
I've seen maps of Sudan showing sort of topography, and they look like two separate countries, the south and the north. Can you talk about what the difference in geography is, just simply between the north and the south?
Okay, in the south, it's a lot like, to me, I think of it like the western United States. It's good farmland. Right now it's being used primarily to graze animals, but they say that if they got in there with the proper irrigation, they could feed Sudan with what could be growing there. So there's a lot of long-range implications. And
the north looks, I mean, almost right at what would be potentially the divide between the two parts. It's very little green at the bottom of what would be northern Sudan, and then it's all desert, basically.
Yes.
What's the impact going to be on the northerners in terms of what do they get from the south now that they might be missing if the south were to leave?
I think some of it is psychological as much as it is real. I think they could work out agreements on crops and farming. We'll get to it later, as you said, the big issue, oil.
Right.
But another part of it is culture. As much as the people in the south want what they want, the people in the north have a real strong relationship with other countries in North Africa and in the Middle East, and they don't want to let their neighbors down.
Now, we've mentioned oil several times, but let's talk about the oil. So
okay.
you have the oil fields are sort of straddling the division between the two, but more in the south than the north.
Yes.
What is that likely to mean, or what challenges is it likely to pose when you talk about how to divide the revenue from that oil?
The biggest challenge is going to come in the Abyei area. In Abyei, there is a tremendous amount of oil fields, and probably, they say, at least 80% of the oil reserves are in the south. However, the pipeline that takes it to the sea is through northern Sudan, and the people in the south are already saying, give us 6 years and we'll have one going through Kenya for our benefit. And, all of that is good, but in the interim, they say approximately 2/3 of the wealth of the north and 95% of the government's wealth in the south come from oil. So think of how significant that's going to be and how they have to work together.
Is it so in some ways there is this mutual dependency there where one may be sitting on most of the oil, but at least in the short term needs the north to get that oil to anybody.
Absolutely.
Right, and that gives the north a certain level of influence, I guess, then over the south when it comes to oil.
Correct.
We talked in the beginning also about the state of the South in terms of development. The 5 miles of paved roads and a landmass is equal to Texas and California put together, which is sort of mind-boggling.
Yes.
So if you had that topography and that level of development, and then you just dumped all this oil revenue in, that seems like I don't know, it's either a godsend or a recipe for disaster. How do you see what the role of oil what is going to mean to the South going forward?
Well, one of the things is going to be is government being trained on how to operate. Most of these people with their military background have to now learn a new skill. Budgeting, reporting to the people in a democracy, transparency, and what is your role as a citizen? What does it mean to have the opportunity to vote and pick your own leaders? So there's a lot of things they're learning in a short order, and as you say, it's all tied around one issue that's a flashpoint, or could be a flashpoint.
Right. Well, can you give your impressions of what life is like, having been in the South? How do most people live? I mean, because it's probably very different from what people say, again, in this part of the world would associate with their lives.
Most people live in what I would call, they're pastoralists, but that's a small rancher. Cattle are the most important asset, and they're youthful. It's young people. If you see someone that makes it to 50, they're really an elder. And so it's a very harsh life, and so much of it takes strength and being able to do hard work. You don't have good water supplies. One issue that was unique was we talked about the dowry system. They brought it up, and they explained to me that a beautiful woman was a very tall woman. And so I asked, what do you mean by that? Well, they said, you want a wife who has a big frame so she can do a lot of work. And that's a natural thought when you think about it. I mean, myself and my children, we wouldn't be worth very much over there.
Because for most people, it's about survival.
Yes. They're not planning for what's going to happen in 3 years. How do I get my kids through college? They're just trying to eke out a living. You have 85% of the people who are illiterate.
So how do people function? What's the state of, say, education in the South? I mean, do most people have access to education? Do they value education? What's the status of education?
They value education really highly, but to this point, much of the education comes either in those few garrison towns in the South, or where groups like Catholic Relief Services are going in and providing schools where people can get to them. You know, usually you can't walk more than about 3 miles to get to school, so they have to be strategically located for the children and then for water and sanitation. You cannot have one without the other, and I guess we take a lot of those things for granted.
Yeah, I mean, we hear a lot about the link between education and, say, nutrition, where kids who are fed and have breakfast or whatever do better in school. Here, you're talking about basic sanitation and water and its effect on education.
Correct. Being able to have drinking water where you don't have problems with diarrhea or vomiting. Being able, their thought of eating, we worry about hot lunches. Mm-hmm. They worry about having a meal, sometime during the day.
A meal?
Yes.
Sometime during the day. We're just up against our break, Art. So maybe when we come back, it'd be useful to continue talking about the conditions there, but then talk about some of the future scenarios, the implications for this whole vote and independence and so on for Sudan and the region. We'll be back in just a moment on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus. We're talking with Art Wichers about the situation in southern Sudan based on his impressions from being there in the fall. So, Art, coming back to just the quality of life that the average southern Sudanese will face, and then the challenges that might pose to a new country. So you're assuming there's independence and there's these negotiations you mentioned, and everything gets worked out, and there's not a lot of violence, and you get elected president of southern Sudan. What's your first concern?
Your first concern is going to be all the different ethnic groups and not having anyone feel marginalized. So you can't just say there are 2 or 3 predominant tribes, we must educate them. You have to reach out to where all the people are. And that's one of the things Catholic Relief is looking at. They look at that map and they say, there are important people throughout this area. How do we get to them for education, for sanitation and water, helping them with agriculture, microfinance, because they need to develop the whole person if they're going to work in a democratic society.
It's very interesting. We were talking earlier about, and you showed me the picture about the countdown to the vote, the North-South vote, and
Yes.
the image at the bottom of that picture. Could you describe that image for us and what it meant?
Well, it's a very powerful image because what it is two hands with broken chains. Now, it was hard for me before I went there to visualize what they were talking about, but to them, they feel because they have been forgotten, they're a marginalized citizen. As one person said to me, I'm a second-class citizen. Now, we don't understand that, but if you're so busy putting out your fires in one part of the country that you ignore people in another, you create another problem.
Right. And of course, the government in Khartoum had fought the 22-year war with the South, but then now, since then, the conflict in the Darfur region in Sudan has flamed up. And so it's easy to, like you say, who also feel marginalized from the North. But the point you made, I thought was really interesting. So if you're now a new leader of Southern Sudan, the problem will be not to replicate the marginalization that the South felt, but this time within Southern Sudan, right?
Correct.
That you're going to have a lot of very needy communities and tribal ethnic groups, and you're not going to please everybody, but you can't sort of risk marginalizing some discrete groups.
That's correct. And what you find is people are becoming aware of this. But again, like with only 5 miles of paved road, communication is a real problem. 15% of your people literate. So FM radio stations, there are 7 of them that the Catholic Church runs over there. And the government, everyone uses it to get out their message. And another big factor that's going to help, or it could be a problem, are the cell phones. Cell phones are becoming very important for people to communicate when you lack an infrastructure on the ground.
Yeah, sort of that leapfrog technology where some people here are thinking, I would like a cell phone, but there is no alternative, right? It is the only way to stay connected.
Yes.
How does an organization like Catholic Relief Services, and there are many sort of international non-profit organizations who are doing development and humanitarian relief work there, but how does an organization like Catholic Relief Services cope with these immense challenges when you have so little infrastructure to work with?
You work with partners on the ground, local people who are strong in various areas. So they're spread out throughout. One of their big concerns right now is it's very difficult for governments or the UN to do something within a country if they feel violence could break out. So one of the things they're doing right now is in those flash areas where the oil are, or where it's located, they're putting away non-perishable supplies where people may have to flee to. As we just saw this past week, there was another big incident in the Abyei area. And now it may not sound big to the world, but up there, it's very unsettling.
I mean, the image in their mind is the past war, which was horribly devastating for many, many years. So I would imagine even a small incident, or what we would think was a small incident in their minds would bring up some very bad memories for them.
Absolutely. And that's going to be another challenge for the international community, the government of the South, and the government in Khartoum. What do they do with Darfur down the road? You can't just settle one problem. You've got to work on all of them.
Well, this leads us into this whole other ripple effects that might happen from this. So Southern Sudan, I mean, for many people would be, I'm sure in the South, would be dream come true. They went from violence to a negotiation to potentially now a peaceful separation. So in some ways that looks like a wonderful victory for peace and coexistence. On the other hand, you have now all these other areas in Sudan, like Darfur, and throughout Africa, where people are going to say, hey, well, now it's our turn. So is this going to be a good precedent or a bad precedent for Africa?
Well, I always feel a step forward is good, but if you do not keep focused on it, it can be stepping backwards. And we've seen that happen too many times in Africa, especially because I think what makes you a wonderful military person, and if that's been your life, you got to be retrained on democracy and governance and having people who disagree with you, and you have to bring them all together. So there's going to be some real challenges. And I think Sudan has to look at what happened in South Africa, what was good, what was bad, in some of these other places. I think there's an education and there's lessons there for everyone.
You mentioned the role of the U.S. and to this point, the role has been, along with the UN and others, to lessen the potential for violence around this vote and around the issue of independence. Assuming that's on the agenda, say, for the next 3 to 6 months, after that, where should the U.S. be focusing its attention?
Well, I think some of the things they have to look at, key issues, are going to be universities. We have to have that if we're going to educate people over there. You have to look at, again, the oil and farming. What is reasonable? What about their national debt? What is the large country's going to do with that $40 billion of debt? How is it going to be allocated?
This is what Sudan
owes right now. They owe $40 billion. How's that going to be allocated? And what's going to be forgiven? What about a national bank? Deloitte is over there right now working on that issue. That's a significant item. I got a communique from them saying that when they arrived 18 months ago, they didn't have even laptops or desktops. Now they have 28, and they have internet when there's electricity. So there's a lot of challenges. So I think the international community has to continue to have some focus.
Now, you also spent some time in Ethiopia, and this whole there's East Africa and Central Africa. Central Africa, especially, being known as kind of the Africa's bad neighborhood. We have conflicts in northern Uganda and Congo and Central African Republic and southern Sudan and Rwanda, all in that general area. And then you have your other problems as you go east, Kenya and Ethiopia and Somalia and Eritrea. What's the future of that region looking like in terms of peace and stability and development?
What's really impressed me, and I've been traveling back and forth over there for the last 8 years, is I have seen real progress when there is not fighting going on. You have real hard-working, industrious people, and I think because of the cell phone, they're becoming much more connected with the world. And that I take as a real positive, but it's also can be something where people become impatient. So I think there's a tremendous future in East Africa for East Africans and for the world.
We were talking about this a little bit before about so we have big states like the United States. We have fledgling states or newly independent states, Ethiopia, maybe southern Sudan, states emerging from conflict. You have the non-governmental movement, organizations like Catholic Relief Services and others. And then we have all the way down to individuals. And a lot of times individuals feel these problems are way too big to be involved in. So we just have a couple minutes left. I'm wondering, what's your advice to an individual who says, hey, I care about that, but I just don't know what I can do about it?
I think we can make a difference. And what led me into this was what I liked about Catholic Relief Services. They help those in need regardless of race, religion, or nationality. And they work with local partners, so there isn't this concern of money being taken away by a government that's running inappropriately. So your donation or your involvement does make a difference, because there are people over there much like us, and we can help them.
What led you to Catholic Relief Services?
My wife. She asked me what was I doing to help the marginalized. And I didn't give her the right answer because I didn't know anything about Catholic relief.
So then, how did you overcome those barriers? So you said, okay, I should be doing something about this issue. And then what made the connection with Catholic Relief Services?
Well, my wife thought it was a wonderful thing to do when her father died. He hadn't made a commitment with helping someone. And I had, of course, first investigate before I would agree. And that's what led me into investigating Catholic Relief. And again, I've seen them on the ground helping those in need.
Great, and so people can go online now. The barriers are probably much easier. There's many fewer barriers to finding out about these organizations and ways to be involved.
Absolutely.
So we encourage folks to do that. And Art Wichers, thank you very much for helping us understand Southern Sudan and the condition there on the ground. To our viewers, we'll see you next week on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,